Alrighty, welcome back. Now that we have the data coming from our API, it's time to work on passing that data into our HTML. So you'll notice that we made several IDs. There's 5 of them in total. One is for our quote container, one is for our quote. This will allow us to replace the text of our quote element. One is for our author, and we have one each for our buttons. So let's go over to the script and we will assign a constant for each of these elements. So at the top here, I'm going to write out const and then the element name in camel case, meaning that the second word and any subsequent words will have a capital letter and the first word will be lowercase, like this. And that is going to equal document dot get element by ID. You can see that it's auto-completing here with Emmet, so we can just press enter, bracket, single quote, and then we're going to put in the name of our ID in our HTML, which is quote-container. And we're going to copy this and paste it 4 more times. And now we're going to change each of these. So we have our quote text, which is just the ID quote. We have our author text, which is the ID author. We have our Twitter button, Twitter BTN for button, and that is the Twitter ID. And lastly, we have our new quote button, BTN, and that is going to be from our new dash quote, quote ID. All right, cool. So we have all of our constants there. Now, to actually start populating this, instead of just console logging the data, we can actually get rid of this console log because we know that that works. We'll get rid of this one as well. We're going to actually start passing our data into our elements. So the very simple way to do this would be to target this constant here, author text. So author text, again, you can see it's auto-completing. I'm just going to press enter. And we're going to do dot inner text instead of inner HTML because this is more secure. It's just changing the text, which is a string, inside of the element. And we're going to assign it the data.quote author. Okay, and the other thing we're going to do is we are going to have the quote text, similar thing, dot inner text equals data.quote text. All right, so we can save that and let's check it out. So it might take a few seconds to load. But there we go. We have a different quote, and it just populated our UI like magic. Awesome. Okay, so the next step is going to be to actually filter the quotes a little bit. So, for example, I want to dynamically reduce the font size for any quotes that are longer than 120 characters. And the other thing that I'd like to do, and I know this firsthand from using this, is that sometimes the author field is just blank. And in that case, I want to replace it and have it say unknown instead of just having a blank space here. All right, so let's jump back to the code and fix those two things. First, we can fix our author issue. So we're going to accomplish that with an if statement. So if the data.quote author equals, so is equal to an empty string, then, with our curly brackets, we want the author text dot inner text, so for our element, to be a string of unknown. Else, if there is an author, then we want our author text dot inner text to equal the data quote author. So essentially, we've just recreated line 19 here, so we can get rid of that. Okay, and we're just going to comment that just to explain what we're doing. So if author is blank, add unknown. Okay, and next, to fix our long quote issue, let's comment out that title first. Reduce font size for long quotes. So we're going to have another if statement. So if the data.quote text dot length, so the amount of characters. For now, we're just going to set it at, let's say 50, but eventually we'll put it back to 120 just so that I can show you that it's working. And we're going to have our curly brackets, the quote text element. We want to look at its class list, so the CSS classes, and add our class long dash quote that we had previously in our CSS. If the length is less, we're going to have our else here, another curly bracket, then our quote text element, we want to remove the CSS class long quote, just in case the previous quote was long and the new one is short, we want to remove it. And we're going to leave this at the bottom that we still want the quote text inner text to be the data that we get from the API. Okay, so let's save that and check it out. So you can see here that our quote text is smaller, so it looks like it's working. Let's refresh the page, and you can see again it's smaller, and there's a new quote that is not smaller because it is actually less than 50 characters. All right, perfect. So that's working as we want it to. That is excellent. So we're just going to go back quickly and change this 50 to 120 because we only want long quotes to become smaller, and we'll save that. And while we're at it, we might as well get rid of the static quote in our HTML. So we'll just backspace that, and we'll get rid of the author as well, and we will save that. Okay, now we're going to move on to the Twitter functionality, which is pretty straightforward. So we're going to go to this Twitter developer page, and basically we're just going to pass in this URL, and we're going to open it in a new window, and we're going to add this parameter of text, and then we're going to dynamically populate that text with our quote data and our author data. All right, so let's copy this and jump back into the code. So we're going to make a new function below this function, tweet quote bracket, curly brackets, and we're going to set a const quote, which equals our quote text dot inner text. So this is the inner text from our element. And we're going to do a similar thing for author. This is going to be our author text elements inner text. Okay, and on the next line, we're going to have a const for our Twitter URL equals, and we're going to use backticks here to denote a template string. The backtick button is just below your escape key. We're going to paste in the Twitter URL. We're going to add a query with the question mark and then text equals, and now we're going to pass in our quote and author using $, curly brackets, and you can see that turn blue. So that means it's going to take whatever data is in there and put it into this string. And then we're going to have a space, then a dash, then another space. Then we're going to do the same thing for our author. And you'll see what this looks like when we actually run it. And then a semicolon to finish that off. Lastly, we're going to open a new tab. So we're going to do window open. And then we're going to pass in the Twitter URL that we've just made, comma. We want this to open in a new tab, so we're going to use underscore and blank. Okay, before we can actually test this, we're going to need to add an event listener to actually trigger this function. So let's scroll down, and we're going to comment out a title for our event listeners. I will comment out a title for our Twitter function, which I forgot to do. Tweet quote. Okay, back down to our event listeners. So we're going to have two event listeners, one for each of our buttons. We're going to do the new quote button first. So new quote button, that's our button element, dot add event listener. You can see that it's the first suggestion here. And then we're going to add a click event. So single quote, click, comma, and then the name of our function. So in this case, it's going to be get quote. You can see that it pre-populated that for us. And then we're going to do the same thing for our Twitter button, dot add event listener, bracket. And then this time, still a click event, but we're going to be targeting our tweet quote function instead. And a semicolon at the end. So again, just to recap, these are our button elements. We're adding an event listener. Anytime they're clicked, they're going to run their subsequent functions. Okay, so let's save that and check it out. Okay, we can close our Twitter page here. And so in theory, when we press our Twitter button, it's going to take our quote and our author and allow us to tweet it. Okay, perfect. So you can see we have our quote text in here, and then we have our space, our dash, and then our author name. That is excellent. So if I was logged into Twitter, it would allow me to just tweet it, but because I'm not logged in, I would have to log in to tweet this. But that's pretty much it for our Twitter functionality. So let's just double check that our new quote functionality works. Okay, perfect. That is awesome. So we have our new quotes, we have our Twitter button working. The very last thing we're going to add in the next lesson is a loading animation, just in case it takes a longer time to load a quote. So like right there, for example. All right, I'll see you in that one. Bye for now.